In the heart of San Francisco, amidst the vibrant hustle of a busy market, an ordinary day was about to take an extraordinary turn. Mia Chun, a small, timid figure, wandered through the market's narrow alleys. At just 11 years old, she had seen more hardship than most adults. Her shoes were worn, her clothes tattered, but it was her eyes, wide and searching, that caught the attention of Linda, the owner of the small flower shop nestled between a bakery and a coffee stand. Linda had been arranging a fresh bouquet of sunflowers when she noticed Mia. The girl was hovering near her stand, her gaze locked on the bright yellow petals, a stark contrast to the dullness of her own world. Something about the way Mia stood there, as if she was longing for something she couldn't name, tugged at Linda's heart. "Hi there," Linda called out, her voice gentle but firm enough to cut through the market's noise. Mia startled, looking up at Linda with those big, cautious eyes. She looked like she was ready to bolt at any second. "Are you lost?" Linda asked, stepping closer but keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. She had seen that look before, on stray animals, on lost children, on people who had forgotten what it felt like to be safe. Mia shook her head, her hands clutching the straps of a small, worn backpack. "No, ma'am. Just looking." Linda crouched down to her level, her smile soft and inviting. "These are sunflowers. Aren't they beautiful? They always turn to face the sun, no matter what." Mia nodded, her eyes still fixed on the flowers. "I like them," she whispered. Linda tilted her head, trying to catch a better glimpse of the girl's face. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" Mia stiffened, the question hanging in the air like a sudden gust of wind. She didn't answer, but Linda could see the fear and uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "Hey," Linda said softly. "How about you come inside? I have some lemonade and cookies. We can talk if you want, or you can just sit for a bit. No pressure." Mia hesitated, glancing around the busy market. The smells of fresh bread and roasted coffee filled the air, but she seemed oblivious to it all. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Linda stood up and led her into the small shop. The air inside was cool and fragrant, filled with the scent of flowers. Mia looked around, taking in the bursts of color, roses, daisies, lilies, each more vibrant than the last. As Linda poured a glass of lemonade, she asked casually, "What's your name?" "Mia," the girl replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mia," Linda repeated with a smile, handing her the glass. "That's a beautiful name. My name's Linda. You can stay here as long as you like, okay?" Mia took the glass, her small hands trembling slightly as she brought it to her lips. She didn't say anything, but the way she sipped the lemonade, as if savoring something she hadn't tasted in a long time, spoke volumes. Linda watched her for a moment, then turned her attention back to the flowers, giving Mia space. She knew better than to push too hard. Whatever had brought this girl here, to this market, was something that needed time to unravel. Outside, the market bustled on, people hurrying past with their bags and baskets. But inside that small flower shop, a quiet connection had begun to form. A connection that would soon change not just Mia's life, but the lives of everyone in that market. Days turned into weeks, and Mia slowly became a familiar presence in Linda's flower shop. She wasn't much of a talker, but Linda noticed the way Mia's eyes brightened when she learned something new. Linda had started teaching her the basics, how to arrange flowers, how to care for them, and even how to help customers. Mia was a fast learner, and more importantly, she seemed to find a sense of purpose in the small tasks. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the market, Joe, the burly baker from next door, strolled into the shop. His apron was dusted with flour, and his smile was as warm as the bread he baked every morning. "Linda, you've got a real apprentice here, huh?" Joe said, nodding towards Mia, who was carefully trimming the stems of some roses. Linda smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "She's a natural. The customers love her, and so do the flowers." Joe chuckled and turned to Mia. "How about you, kid? Do you like working here?" Mia glanced up at him, her expression guarded, but she nodded. "Yes, sir. I like it here." Joe grinned. "Well, that's good to hear. You know, I could use some help over at the bakery too, if you're interested. What do you say, Mia? Ever baked a loaf of bread before?" Mia shook her head, but there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes. No, sir. But I can learn. I bet you can, Joe said with a wink. How about you come by tomorrow morning? We'll start with something simple, maybe some cookies. Do you like cookies? Mia hesitated, then nodded again. I like cookies. Great, Joe said, clapping his hands together. It's a date then. Be there at 6 sharp. We bakers start early, you know? As Joe left, Linda watched Mia closely. What do you think? She asked gently. Do you want to try working with Joe? Mia stared down at the roses she was trimming, her brow furrowed in thought. I think I do, she said after a long pause. He seems nice. He is, Linda agreed. Joe's one of the kindest people you'll meet. And if you ever feel uncomfortable, you can always come back here. This will always be your place too. Mia looked up at Linda, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Thank you, Miss Linda. Linda reached out and gently tucked a stray lock of Mia's hair behind her ear. You're welcome, sweetie. You're doing great, you know that? Mia didn't say anything, but the way she blushed and ducked her head told Linda everything she needed to know. This little girl, who had come into her life so unexpectedly, was starting to feel like she belonged. The next morning, Mia was at the bakery by 6, just as Joe had asked. The shop was filled with the rich aroma of dough and cinnamon, and for a moment, Mia just stood there, breathing it in. She had never known a smell could make her feel so at home. Joe greeted her with a big smile. Right on time? That's a good start. Now, let's get to work. He showed her how to measure the ingredients, how to mix the dough, and how to shape it into neat little balls for cookies. Mia watched closely, her hands moving tentatively at first, but with more confidence as Joe guided her through each step. As the first batch of cookies went into the oven, Joe handed Mia a glass of milk. Here, you deserve a break. Baking's hard work, isn't it? Mia nodded, sipping the milk. It is, but I like it. Joe chuckled. I had a feeling you would. You're a natural, just like Linda said. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the warmth of the oven and the comforting smells filling the space between them. Mia felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of safety, of being cared for. After the cookies were done and the shop opened for the morning rush, Joe introduced Mia to the regular customers. They were a friendly bunch, always ready with a kind word or a joke, and Mia found herself smiling more than she had in years. As she handed a fresh cookie to a little boy who looked about her age, she realized something. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was happy. Not just content, but truly happy. It was a small, fragile feeling, but it was there like the first bloom of a flower in spring. And Mia, who had spent so much of her life running and hiding, decided that maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to let herself bloom too. The market bustled with life as the days turned into weeks, and Mia found herself falling into a comfortable routine. She split her time between Linda's flower shop and Joe's bakery, and the once shy, reserved girl began to open up. The market community welcomed her with open arms, and Mia, in turn, started to see the market as her new home. One afternoon, as Mia was arranging a bouquet of lilies at Linda's shop, a shadow fell across the flowers. She looked up to see a man she hadn't noticed before, standing just outside the shop. He was tall, with a stern face etched with lines that suggested years of hardship. His suit was immaculate, yet his eyes seemed to hold a coldness that made Mia uneasy. Good afternoon, he said, his voice deep and authoritative. I'm Charles, the market administrator. I'm here to check on things. Linda, who was at the counter organizing some paperwork, looked up with a smile. Afternoon, Charles. Everything's running smoothly, as usual. This is Mia, she added, gesturing toward the girl, who had instinctively stepped back a little. Charles's gaze shifted to Mia, his expression unreadable. Mia, he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. You're the girl everyone's been talking about. Mia wasn't sure what to say, so she simply nodded. There was something about Charles that made her feel like she was being measured, evaluated. Word travels fast around here, Charles continued, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Mia. I've heard you've been spending quite a bit of time around the market. Before Mia could respond, Linda stepped in. She's been a big help, Charles. She's a quick learner, and the customers love her. She's part of our little market family now. Charles didn't seem convinced. He looked at Mia again, his gaze intense. It's important to remember that this market has rules, young lady. We keep things in order here, and everyone contributes. I'll be keeping an eye on things. There was a tension in the air that Mia couldn't quite place, but Linda's voice cut through it with practiced ease. Of course, Charles. You do what you need to do. We're all just trying to make a living here. Charles nodded curtly, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the throng of market-goers. Mia watched him go, a knot of unease settling in her stomach. Don't mind him, Linda said softly, placing a comforting hand on Mia's shoulder. Charles is just, well, he's a bit strict, but he means well. He's been through a lot, just like you. Mia looked up at Linda, her brow furrowed. What do you mean? Linda sighed, glancing in the direction Charles had gone. He wasn't always like this. Charles grew up around here, had a tough childhood, lost his parents young, and had to fend for himself. That kind of life can harden a person, but deep down he's not a bad man. Mia nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she understood. All she knew was that Charles had made her feel small, like she didn't belong. But if Linda said he was okay, maybe he was just a little rough around the edges. Later that day, as Mia walked through the market on her way to the bakery, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder a few times, half expecting to see Charles following her. But all she saw were the familiar faces of the vendors and customers. When she reached Joe's bakery, he greeted her with his usual cheerful grin. Hey there, Mia. Ready to get your hands in some dough? Mia managed to smile, though her mind was still on her encounter with Charles. Yes, sir, she said, tying on her apron. Joe noticed her hesitation. Everything okay, kiddo? Mia shrugged, trying to shake off the unease. I met Charles today. He seems kind of strict. Joe let out a hearty laugh. Strict is putting it mildly. Charles is as tough as they come, but don't let him scare you. He's just doing his job, making sure everything's in order. Besides, I don't think he's as bad as he seems. Mia nodded, trying to take comfort in Joe's words. Linda said the same thing. That's because Linda's right, Joe said, his tone more serious now. Charles has been through the ringer, just like a lot of us here. But you know what? This market has a way of softening even the hardest of hearts. Just give him time. Mia didn't say anything, but she hoped Joe was right. As they worked together, kneading dough and shaping loaves, Mia tried to push thoughts of Charles out of her mind. But even as she focused on her work, she couldn't help but wonder about the man who seemed so determined to keep his walls up. She wanted to believe that people could change, that maybe, with enough kindness, even someone like Charles could find a way to let others in. But for now, all she could do was continue with her work and hope that time would reveal more about the man who was slowly becoming a constant presence in her new life. The next few days passed quietly, but the memory of her encounter with Charles lingered in Mia's mind. She kept herself busy, throwing herself into her tasks at the flower shop and the bakery, but she couldn't quite shake the feeling that Charles was still watching her, even when she couldn't see him. One evening, as Mia was getting ready to leave the market, Linda approached her with a concerned look on her face. Mia, honey, can I talk to you for a second? Mia nodded, setting down the flowers she had been arranging. Sure, Miss Linda. What's wrong? Linda hesitated, glancing around the shop to make sure they were alone. It's about Charles. He came by again today while you were at the bakery. He asked me some questions about you. Mia's heart skipped a beat. Questions? Like what? Linda sighed, pulling up a chair and motioning for Mia to sit beside her. You wanted to know more about where you came from, how long you've been here, that sort of thing. I told him the truth, of course, that you're a good kid who's just trying to find her way. But I think Charles is concerned. Mia felt a lump form in her throat. Did I do something wrong? Oh no, sweetie, Linda said quickly, reaching out to take Mia's hand. You haven't done anything wrong. Charles is just, well, he's very particular about how things are run around here. He likes to keep everything in order. I think he's just trying to figure out where you fit in. Mia looked down at her hands, feeling small and uncertain. I don't know if I do fit in, Miss Linda. Linda squeezed her hand gently. You do, Mia. You've already made such a difference here. The market is better with you in it, trust me. Charles just needs a little more time to see that. Mia nodded, though her mind was still racing. She didn't want to cause any trouble, especially not for Linda or Joe. Should I talk to him? Linda considered this for a moment, then shook her head. Not just yet. Let's give him a little more time. I've known Charles for years. He's not as tough as he seems, but he's slow to trust. For now, just keep being you. That's all anyone can ask. Mia tried to take comfort in Linda's words, but as she left the flower shop that evening, the weight of Charles's scrutiny hung over her like a cloud. She walked through the market, the stalls mostly closed up for the night, her footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. She was almost at the exit when she heard footsteps behind her. Mia froze, her heart pounding as she turned around. There, standing under the dim light of a street lamp, was Charles. "Mia," he said, his voice low and calm. "We need to talk." Mia swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Okay." Charles stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "I've been watching you," he said bluntly. "I know you're trying to do good here, and I appreciate that. But I also need to know more about you. Where are you from? Who's looking out for you?" Mia felt a wave of panic rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. I don't really have anyone, sir. I used to live on the streets before Miss Linda found me." Charles studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense. "No family? No one looking for you?" Mia shook her head. "No, sir. It's just me." Charles sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, kid, this market is like a small town. We take care of our own here, but that also means we need to know who we're dealing with. I'm not trying to scare you, but I need to know if there's anything I should be worried about." Mia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I'm not here to cause any trouble, I swear. I just wanted a place where I could feel safe." Charles's expression softened just a fraction. "I believe you, Mia, but safety goes both ways. If something from your past follows you here, I need to be prepared. Do you understand?" Mia nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes, sir." There was a long silence as Charles looked at her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh. "All right, we'll give this a little more time. But, Mia, if there's anything at all, you think I should know, you need to tell me. No secrets, okay?" Mia nodded again. "Okay." Charles gave her one last, searching look before turning to leave. "Good night, Mia. Be safe." "Good night, Mr. Charles," Mia whispered as she watched him disappear into the shadows. As she made her way home, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that her past, the one she had tried so hard to escape, was catching up with her. And now, for the first time since she'd found refuge in the market, she wasn't sure if she was really safe anymore. Mia barely slept that night. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, of Charles, of the life she had left behind, and of the fragile sense of security she had begun to build. By morning, she was exhausted, but she forced herself out of bed, determined not to let her fears show. When she arrived at the market, the usual bustle of activity did little to calm her nerves. She moved through the motions at Linda's flower shop, her hands working on autopilot as her mind raced. Linda noticed Mia's distraction, but didn't press her, figuring the girl would speak when she was ready. Midway through the morning, Joe appeared in the doorway, his face lit up with a grin. "Mia, got a surprise for you at the bakery. Come on over when you've got a minute." Mia nodded, trying to muster a smile. "I'll be there soon, Mr. Joe." Linda watched her with concern. "Mia, are you all right? You've been awfully quiet today." Mia hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm fine, Miss Linda. Just a little tired." Linda wasn't convinced, but she didn't push. "If you need to talk, I'm here. Anytime." Mia nodded, grateful for Linda's kindness, but the thought of confiding in anyone about her fears felt too overwhelming. She finished up her task and made her way over to the bakery, where Joe was waiting with an excited expression. "Close your eyes," Joe instructed as soon as she walked in. Mia blinked in surprise but did as she was told. She heard him shuffling around, the sounds of boxes being moved, and something heavy being placed on the counter. "Okay, open them." Joe's voice was filled with pride. Mia opened her eyes and gasped. There, on the counter, was a brand new apron, embroidered with her name in bright, cheerful letters. Next to it was a small set of baking tools, a rolling pin, cookie cutters, and a mixing bowl, all neatly arranged and waiting for her. "Mr. Joe, this is..." Mia was at a loss for words, her eyes wide with wonder. Joe beamed. "I thought it was about time you had your own tools." You've been doing such a great job here, and I wanted to show you how much we appreciate having you around." Mia's eyes welled up with tears, but this time they were tears of happiness. "Thank you, Mr. Joe. This means a lot." Joe gave her a warm pat on the shoulder. "You've earned it, kiddo. Now, how about we break these in with a fresh batch of cookies?" Mia nodded eagerly, slipping on the new apron and feeling a surge of pride as she tied the strings. As they worked together, she found herself slowly relaxing, the comfort of the familiar routine easing the tension that had built up inside her. But even as she measured flour and cracked eggs, the conversation with Charles kept replaying in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was right, that the past she had tried so hard to leave behind might eventually find her. And if it did, she wasn't sure what it would mean for the new life she had started to build here. After they finished baking, Joe wrapped up a few cookies for Mia to take back to Linda. As she stepped out of the bakery, she noticed Charles standing across the market, his gaze fixed on her. He didn't approach, but the intensity in his eyes made it clear that he hadn't forgotten their conversation. Mia quickly looked away, clutching the bag of cookies to her chest as she hurried back to the flower shop. She didn't want to think about Charles or what he might be wondering about her. She just wanted to focus on the present, on the flowers, on the cookies, on the people who had shown her kindness. But as she rounded the corner, she nearly collided with a woman she had never seen before. The woman was tall, with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. She was dressed in a sleek, dark coat, and there was something about her that immediately set Mia on edge. "Sorry," Mia mumbled, stepping aside to let the woman pass. The woman didn't move. Instead, she looked Mia up and down, her eyes narrowing as if she were sizing her up. "Are you Mia-chin?" Mia's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" The woman's lips curled into a thin smile. "Let's just say I'm someone who's been looking for you for a long time." Panic surged through Mia's chest. She tried to step back, but the woman grabbed her arm, her grip firm and unyielding. "You've been hiding well, but it's time to go home, Mia. There are people who are very interested in where you've been." Mia struggled against the woman's hold, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Let me go. I don't know you." The woman's expression hardened. "Enough games, Mia. We could do this the easy way or the hard way." Suddenly, a strong hand clamped down on the woman's shoulder, pulling her away from Mia. "The hard way, huh? I wouldn't recommend that." It was Charles, his face a mask of controlled anger. He stepped between Mia and the woman, his stance protective. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The woman glared at him, her grip on Mia's arm loosening. "This is none of your business. Walk away." Charles didn't budge. "Anything that happens in this market is my business. Now, I suggest you let her go." The woman hesitated, clearly weighing her options. Then, with a sneer, she released Mia's arm and took a step back. "Fine, but this isn't over." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as she had appeared. Mia stood frozen, her heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. Charles turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you okay, Mia?" Mia nodded shakily, tears brimming in her eyes. "Who was she? Why did she know my name?" Charles sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. You're not alone in this, Mia. We'll handle it together." For the first time, Mia saw a side of Charles that wasn't just stern and authoritative. There was genuine concern in his eyes, a hint of something that almost looked like worry. "Thank you," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. Charles nodded, his gaze steady. "You don't have to thank me. But Mia, if there's anything you haven't told me, now's the time. We can't protect you if we don't know what we're up against." Mia hesitated, the fear of her past crashing down on her like a tidal wave. She had wanted so badly to leave it all behind, to start fresh. But now it seemed like that might not be possible. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell you everything." Enjoying the video? Subscribe to our channel to receive more interesting content. Click the subscribe button and stay updated with the latest news. Mia sat on a wooden crate in the back of the flower shop, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Charles stood nearby, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on her. Linda had closed the shop early, drawing the blinds to give them privacy. The air inside was thick with tension, and Mia could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to find the words. Charles waited patiently, his expression stern but not unkind. "Whenever you're ready, Mia," he said softly. Mia took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. It's hard to know where to start." "Start wherever you need to," Charles encouraged, his tone gentler than usual. Mia nodded, staring down at her feet. "I never really knew my parents. My mom left when I was little, and my dad, well, he wasn't around much. I lived with my aunt for a while, but she couldn't take care of me. So I ended up on the streets." Linda, who had been quietly listening, gasped softly. "Oh, Mia." Mia looked up at Linda, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It wasn't as bad as it sounds at first. I found places to stay, people who would help me sometimes. But it was lonely and scary." Charles's expression darkened, but he didn't interrupt. "I started moving around a lot," Mia continued, her voice trembling. "From city to city, trying to find somewhere safe. But no matter where I went, it felt like someone was always watching me, following me. I don't know who they were or why they were after me, but I couldn't shake the feeling." Linda knelt down beside Mia, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "You're safe here, Mia. We'll make sure of that." Mia's lips quivered, but she forced herself to keep going. "Then I came to San Francisco. I thought maybe here, in such a big city, I could disappear. But it wasn't long before I noticed people watching me again. That's when I met you, Miss Linda. And when you offered to let me help in the shop, it felt like maybe, finally, I could stop running." Charles let out a slow breath, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed what Mia was saying. "And the woman from today? Do you think she's one of the people who's been following you?" Mia nodded. "I think so. She knew my name, and the way she talked, it's like she knew all about me." Charles exchanged a glance with Linda, his jaw tightening. "Did she say anything else? Anything about why she's looking for you?" Mia shook her head. "No. She just said it was time to go home. But I don't know what she meant by that. I don't have a home. Not anymore." There was a heavy silence as the weight of Mia's words settled over them. Linda squeezed Mia's hand, her eyes filled with compassion. "Mia, you have a home here with us. No one's going to take you away. Not if we can help it." Charles uncrossed his arms, stepping closer. "We need to be smart about this. If someone's after you, we need to know who they are and what they want. But first, we need to make sure you're safe. Have you noticed anyone else following you? Any other strangers hanging around?" Mia bit her lip, trying to remember. "I don't think so, but I haven't really been looking. I was trying so hard to just fit in." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "Okay, from now on, we'll keep a closer eye on things. You're not alone in this, Mia. We'll figure it out together." Mia looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Charles. I don't know what I'd do without you and Miss Linda." Linda brushed a tear from Mia's cheek. "You don't have to worry about that. We're not going anywhere." Charles's expression softened as he looked down at Mia. "We're a team now, okay? And teams stick together." Mia nodded, feeling a small flicker of hope ignite in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't facing her fears alone. She had people who cared about her, who were willing to stand by her, no matter what came next. But even as she drew strength from their support, she couldn't shake the feeling that the woman's appearance was just the beginning. The past she had tried so hard to outrun was closing in, and whatever was coming, Mia knew it wouldn't be easy to face. But with Charles and Linda by her side, maybe, just maybe, she had a chance. The next morning, Mia awoke with a sense of unease lingering in her chest. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft, golden light through the window of her small room above the flower shop. She dressed quickly, her mind still replaying the events of the previous day. The woman, Charles stepping in, the confession she had finally made. It felt like her world had tilted on its axis, and she wasn't sure if it would ever feel steady again. When she reached the market, it was still quiet, the usual hum of activity yet to begin. She took a deep breath, trying to focus on the day ahead. Linda was already in the shop, arranging the first delivery of flowers, her movements calm and methodical. "Morning, Mia," Linda greeted her with a warm smile, though Mia could see the worry behind it. "Morning, Miss Linda," Mia replied, her voice soft. She walked over to the counter, her hands automatically reaching for the stems that needed trimming. They worked in silence for a while, the sound of snipping scissors and rustling leaves filling the air. It was a familiar routine, one that usually brought Mia a sense of peace, but today, her thoughts were too scattered to focus. Finally, Linda set down her scissors and turned to Mia. "How are you holding up?" Mia looked up, meeting Linda's concerned gaze. "I don't know. I keep thinking about that woman and what she wants from me. I'm scared, Miss Linda. I thought I could leave everything behind, but it's like it's all catching up with me." Linda stepped closer, wrapping an arm around Mia's shoulders. "I understand, sweetheart. It's natural to feel scared, but you're not alone in this. We'll figure out who she is and why she's after you. Until then, we'll make sure you're safe. That's the most important thing." Mia nodded, grateful for Linda's reassurance, but the fear still gnawed at her. What if she comes back? What if she brings others with her? Linda's expression hardened, a fierce protectiveness shining in her eyes. "Then she'll have to go through all of us to get to you, and that won't be easy." Mia managed a small smile at Linda's determination. "Thank you, Miss Linda. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You don't have to think about that," Linda said softly, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "Now let's finish up here and get ready for the day. We have a lot of flowers to sell, and I have a feeling it's going to be a busy one." Mia nodded, turning her attention back to the flowers. She tried to lose herself in the work, but her mind kept drifting back to the woman's cold gaze, the way she had known Mia's name, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. As the morning progressed, the market came to life. The usual crowd of shoppers filled the aisles, the air buzzing with conversation and laughter. Mia served customers with her usual polite smile, but inside, she was on edge, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd for any sign of the woman or anyone who seemed out of place. Around midday, Joe stopped by the flower shop with a loaf of fresh bread in hand. "Thought you might like a snack," he said with a grin, handing it to Mia. "Thanks, Mr. Joe," Mia replied, taking the bread gratefully. She broke off a piece and took a bite, savoring the familiar, comforting taste. Joe leaned against the counter, his expression more serious as he looked at her. "How are you doing, kiddo? Charles filled me in on what happened yesterday." Mia swallowed, lowering the bread. "I'm trying to be okay, but it's hard. I'm scared, Mr. Joe. I don't know what she wants, but it feels like she's been looking for me for a long time." Joe nodded, his brow furrowing in concern. "I get it, but you've got a lot of people here who care about you, Mia. We're not going to let anything happen to you." Mia's eyes welled up with tears, but she blinked them away. "I know. It's just hard to believe that everything could go back to normal after this." Joe reached out and ruffled her hair affectionately. "Normal's overrated anyway. But I promise you, we'll get through this. Together." Mia smiled, though it was a little shaky. "Thank you, Mr. Joe." "Anytime, kiddo," Joe replied, giving her a wink. "Now, I've got to get back to the bakery before the lunch rush hits." "You take care, all right?" "I will," Mia promised, watching as Joe left the shop and disappeared into the crowd. The afternoon passed slowly, the weight of Mia's fears pressing down on her more heavily with each passing hour. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen, that the woman would return, or that someone else would show up, demanding answers that Mia didn't have. As the day drew to a close, the market began to quiet down, the sun dipping low in the sky. Mia was just finishing up her last task of the day when Charles appeared in the doorway. He looked tired, his face drawn with worry, but there was a determined set to his jaw. "Mia," he said, his voice steady but serious. "We need to talk." Mia felt her heart skip a beat. "What's wrong?" Charles glanced around, making sure they were alone. "I've been asking around, trying to find out more about that woman. I haven't learned much, but I did find out that someone matching her description was seen talking to a man near the entrance to the market this afternoon. I didn't see them myself, but I trust the source." Mia's blood ran cold. "Do you think they're planning something?" "I don't know," Charles admitted, "but I don't want to take any chances. I think it's best if you stay with Linda tonight, just in case." Mia nodded, her stomach twisting with fear. "Okay, I'll stay with Miss Linda." Charles placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Mia. I promise. But for now, I need you to stay alert and stick close to people you trust." "I will," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. Charles gave her a small nod, then turned to leave. "Take care, Mia. We'll talk more in the morning." Mia watched him go, a sense of dread settling deep in her bones. She knew Charles was trying to protect her, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead was almost too much to bear. All she could do now was hope that, whatever was coming, she would be ready for it. The night air was cool as Mia stood outside the flower shop, her breath forming small puffs of mist in the dim light. The market was eerily quiet, the usual bustling energy replaced by a heavy stillness that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Linda locked up the shop, her movements quick and deliberate, a sure sign that she was as uneasy as Mia felt. "All right, Mia," Linda said, slipping the keys into her bag. "Let's head upstairs. I've got a spare room ready for you." Mia nodded, clutching her small backpack close to her chest. "Thank you, Miss Linda. I'm sorry for all the trouble." Linda gave her a reassuring smile, though there was a shadow of concern in her eyes. "It's no trouble at all, sweetheart. I'm just glad you're here with me tonight." They climbed the narrow staircase that led to Linda's apartment above the shop. It was a cozy space, filled with the scent of lavender and the soft glow of warm lamps. Mia had been up here a few times before, usually for tea and cookies after a long day in the market, but tonight the apartment felt different, like a refuge from the world outside. Linda showed Mia to the spare room, which was small but inviting, with a neatly made bed and a quilt that looked handmade. "You can settle in here. There's an extra blanket in the closet if you get cold. And if you need anything, I'm just down the hall." Mia set her backpack down by the bed and turned to Linda. "I really appreciate this, Miss Linda. I don't know what I would have done if you weren't here." Linda pulled Mia into a gentle hug. "You don't have to thank me, Mia. You're family now, and family looks out for each other. Try to get some rest, okay?" Mia nodded, though she doubted she would be able to sleep. As Linda left the room, Mia sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the walls, her mind racing. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound from the street below, made her jump. The fear that had been gnawing at her all day had grown into a full-blown sense of dread. After a while, she decided to get up and look out the window. She pulled back the curtain just enough to peer down at the darkened market below. The stalls were closed, the streetlights casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Everything seemed still, almost too still, as if the market itself was holding its breath. As she watched, something caught her eye, a figure moving in the shadows near the edge of the market. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she strained to see who it was. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and they moved with purpose, heading towards the entrance to the market. Mia's breath hitched as she recognized the woman from earlier, the one who had grabbed her arm. The woman stopped near the entrance, looking around as if she was waiting for someone. Mia's hands tightened on the windowsill, her fear turning into a cold, sharp panic. She backed away from the window, her mind racing. She knew she should tell Linda, but the thought of dragging her into this danger made Mia hesitate. She didn't want to put Linda at risk, didn't want to bring whatever trouble was following her into Linda's home. But as she stood there, frozen with indecision, a soft knock on the door startled her. Mia's heart leapt into her throat, and she spun around, half expecting the woman to be standing there. But it was Linda, her face pale and tense. "Mia, are you okay?" Linda asked, her voice soft but edged with worry. "I thought I heard something." Mia opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't want to burden Linda with her fear, didn't want to admit that the woman was right outside, waiting for her. But she couldn't lie, not when Linda was looking at her with such concern. I saw her," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "The woman from earlier. She's outside, near the market entrance." Linda's eyes widened, and she stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Mia's arm. "Are you sure?" Mia nodded, her throat tight with fear. "Yes, I saw her. She's just standing there, like she's waiting for something." Linda took a deep breath, her expression hardening with resolve. "Okay, we need to call Charles. He'll know what to do." Mia watched as Linda hurried out of the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had come to San Francisco to start over, to leave the danger behind, but now it felt like she had only brought it with her. She heard Linda's voice in the other room, low and urgent, and knew she was on the phone with Charles. Mia sat down on the bed, her hands shaking as she tried to think of what to do next. She felt so small, so helpless, and the fear that had been simmering inside her all day was now threatening to consume her. Minutes later, Linda returned, her face tense but determined. "Charles is on his way. He told us to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and not to go near the windows." Mia nodded, trying to steady her breathing. "Okay." Linda sat down beside her, pulling her into a protective embrace. "We'll be all right, Mia. Charles is the best at handling situations like this. He won't let anything happen to you." Mia leaned into Linda, grateful for the comfort, but the fear still clung to her, refusing to let go. They sat together in silence. The only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall, each minute stretching out painfully as they waited. Finally, the distant sound of a car engine broke the silence. Mia tensed, listening as the car came closer, then stopped just outside the shop. Linda stood up, moving to the door with careful steps. "It's Charles," she said quietly, peeking through the peephole. "Stay here. I'll let him in." Mia nodded, her heart pounding as Linda opened the door. She heard the low murmur of voices, Charles's deep, steady tone, and Linda's softer replies. Then Charles appeared in the doorway of the room, his expression serious but reassuring. "Mia," he said, his voice calm, "we're going to figure this out. But I need you to tell me everything you remember about that woman. Every detail, no matter how small." Mia nodded, steeling herself as she began to recount everything she knew, hoping that somehow it would be enough to keep her safe from whatever was coming next. Mia sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she recounted every detail she could remember about the woman. Charles stood in front of her, listening intently, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. Linda sat beside Mia, offering silent support, her presence a calming anchor in the storm of Mia's thoughts. "She was tall," Mia began, her voice trembling slightly, "and she had this sharp look about her, like she was always judging you. Her clothes were dark, almost like she was trying to blend in, but she didn't seem like the kind of person who would just disappear into a crowd." Charles nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Anything else? Did she say anything that stood out to you?" Mia bit her lip, trying to recall the exact words the woman had used. "She said it was time to go home, and that there were people interested in where I'd been. But she never mentioned who those people were, or why they were looking for me." Charles's brow furrowed, his mind clearly working through the possibilities. "Did she mention any names? Give you any clues about who she might be working for?" Mia shook her head. "No, nothing like that. She seemed so sure of herself, like she already knew everything about me." Charles exchanged a glance with Linda, then turned back to Mia. "It sounds like she's been tracking you for a while. Do you have any idea why? Did anything happen before you came here that might have made you a target?" Mia hesitated, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. "I don't know. I tried to keep to myself, stay out of trouble. But I was always moving, always looking over my shoulder. Maybe someone noticed." Charles's expression softened slightly, and he crouched down to her level, his voice steady and calm. "Mia, I need you to think really hard. Is there anyone from your past who might have a reason to find you? Someone you left behind? Or someone who might be holding a grudge?" Mia's mind raced as she tried to think back, but the memories were a blur, cities, streets, faces that all blended together in her mind. She shook her head, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. I don't know why anyone would want to find me." Linda squeezed her hand gently, her voice soft. "It's okay, Mia. You've been through a lot, and it's hard to remember everything. We're just trying to piece things together so we can help you." Mia nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I'm sorry. I wish I could remember more." Charles stood up, his expression thoughtful. "You're doing great, Mia. Every little detail helps. We'll figure this out, I promise." Mia managed a small smile, though her heart was still heavy with fear and uncertainty. "What are we going to do now?" Charles sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "First, we're going to make sure you're safe. I've got some friends in the local police department, people I trust. I'll give them a call, see if they can keep an eye on things around the market. Maybe run a check on that woman, see if they can find out who she is." Mia's eyes widened. "The police? Do you think that's necessary?" Charles nodded, his tone firm. "Yes. We don't know what we're dealing with yet, and I'm not taking any chances with your safety. If this woman's been following you, we need to know why. And we need to make sure she doesn't get the chance to do it again." Mia felt a shiver run down her spine, but she knew Charles was right. The idea of getting the police involved made everything feel more real, more dangerous, but it also brought a sense of relief. She wasn't facing this alone. She had people who were willing to fight for her. Linda stood up, her expression resolute. "I'll stay with Mia tonight, keep her company. We can take turns keeping watch." Charles shook his head. "No need. I'll stay here too. I'll make sure no one comes near the place." Mia looked up at him, her voice small. "You're going to stay all night?" Charles gave her a reassuring nod. "I am. I'm not leaving until I know you're safe. We'll get through this, Mia. Together." The weight of his words settled over the room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Mia felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She had people who cared about her, who were willing to protect her no matter what. As the night wore on, Mia tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. She kept hearing the woman's voice in her head, those cold, calculating words that had shattered the fragile peace she had found in San Francisco. She tossed and turned, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear and uncertainty. In the early hours of the morning, she finally gave up on sleep and slipped out of bed, pulling on her shoes as quietly as she could. She tiptoed down the hall, careful not to wake Linda or Charles, who were dozing on the couch in the living room. Mia reached the front door and paused, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She knew it was dangerous, knew she should stay inside where it was safe. But the fear of being trapped, of waiting helplessly for something bad to happen, was too much to bear. She needed air, needed to clear her head. Just a few minutes, she told herself. Then she would come back inside. She unlocked the door as quietly as she could and slipped out into the cool night. The market was eerily still, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of old wooden stalls. Mia walked slowly, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth. She didn't have a destination in mind. She just needed to move, to think. As she reached the center of the market, she stopped, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing under one of the streetlights, was the woman. She hadn't noticed Mia yet, her attention focused on something in the distance. Mia's heart raced as she debated whether to turn back or confront her. But before she could decide, the woman turned, her eyes locking onto Mia's with a predatory gleam. There was no time to think, no time to run. The woman stepped forward, her expression cold and determined. "It's time, Mia," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You've run long enough." Mia's blood ran cold as the woman advanced, her fear paralyzing her in place. She had no idea what to do, no idea how to escape. All she could do was pray that someone, anyone, would come to help her before it was too late. Mia stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as the woman advanced toward her. The market, which had felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a trap with no escape. The cold night air seemed to close in around her, and her mind raced, searching for any possible way out of this situation. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," the woman said, her voice low and menacing. She moved with a confidence that sent a chill down Mia's spine. "You've been running for a long time, but it's over now. Come with me, and no one has to get hurt." Mia's heart pounded in her chest, her fear threatening to overwhelm her. She glanced around, desperately hoping for some sign of help. But the market was deserted, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the city beyond. She could feel the woman's gaze boring into her, like a predator stalking its prey. "I don't know you," Mia managed to say, her voice trembling. "I don't know why you're after me." The woman's lips curled into a thin, cruel smile. "Oh, Mia, you might not know me, but I know all about you. And the people I work for, they know even more. It's time to stop pretending you can hide. We've given you more than enough chances. Mia took a step back, her mind screaming at her to run, but her legs felt like they were made of lead. Please, I just want to be left alone. I haven't done anything wrong. The woman's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. This isn't about right or wrong. It's about what you know and who wants that information. You've been living on borrowed time, Mia, and now it's time to pay up. Mia felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had spent so long trying to be strong, trying to survive on her own. But now, faced with this woman who seemed to know every secret she had tried to bury, she felt more vulnerable than ever. "Who are you?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering whether to answer. "You can call me Evelyn. That's all you need to know. The rest, well, it doesn't really matter, does it?" Mia's mind raced, trying to piece together what little she knew. Evelyn. The name didn't mean anything to her, but the way the woman carried herself, the way she spoke, it was clear she was someone dangerous, someone who had been given authority and power. "Why me?" Mia's voice trembled. "What do you want from me?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "It's not what I want, Mia. It's what the people I work for want. They've been very patient, but they're not going to wait any longer. You have something they need, and they won't stop until they get it." Mia shook her head, confusion mixing with fear. "I don't understand. I don't have anything. I don't know anything." Evelyn sighed, as if growing tired of the conversation. "Enough games, Mia. We both know that's not true. You may not remember everything, but that doesn't change the facts. Now, are you going to come quietly, or do I have to make this difficult?" Mia's instincts screamed at her to run, but she knew she couldn't outrun Evelyn. Not with the way the woman moved, with that predatory grace. But maybe she could outsmart her, at least long enough to find help. Mia took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "If I go with you, what happens to me?" Evelyn's expression remained cold. "That depends on you. Cooperate, and things will be easier. Resist, and well, you won't like the alternative." Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she weighed her options. She could go with Evelyn, hope to find a way to escape later. Or she could try to run now, risk everything on a desperate bid for freedom. Neither option seemed promising, but she had to choose. Before she could decide, a sudden noise broke the tense silence. A door creaking opened nearby. Mia and Evelyn both turned toward the sound, and Mia's heart leapt with hope as she saw Charles step out of the shadows, his face set in grim determination. "Step away from her," Charles ordered, his voice calm but filled with authority. He took a step forward, his eyes locked on Evelyn. "Whatever you're after, you're not going to get it tonight." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, annoyance, perhaps. "This isn't your concern," she said coolly. "Walk away now, and you won't get hurt." Charles shook his head, his stance unwavering. "That's not going to happen. Mia is under my protection. If you want her, you'll have to go through me." For a moment, the tension hung thick in the air, as if the entire market was holding its breath. Mia could see the wheels turning in Evelyn's mind, weighing the risks, calculating her next move. Then, with a slight shrug, she took a step back. "This isn't over," Evelyn warned, her voice as cold as ice. "You're making a mistake, and it's going to cost you." Charles didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I'm willing to take that risk." Evelyn's eyes flicked to Mia, a final, lingering look that sent a shiver down her spine. Then, without another word, she turned and melted back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as she had appeared. Mia let out a shaky breath, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. Charles was at her side in an instant, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, filled with concern. Mia nodded, though she felt anything but all right. I don't know. She was going to take me. She knew everything about me. And she said it's not over." Charles's expression hardened. "She won't get another chance. I'm going to make sure of that." Mia looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was the same steady determination that had given her hope from the beginning. "Let's get you back inside," Charles said gently, guiding her toward the shop. "We need to talk to the police, make sure they're aware of what's happening. You're safe now, Mia. We'll keep you safe." As they walked back, Mia felt the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. She had spent so long running, so long trying to protect herself. But now she realized that she didn't have to do it alone. She had Charles, Linda, and even Joe, all of them ready to stand by her, no matter what came next. For the first time in a long time, Mia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would be all right. She wasn't sure what the future held, but with the people around her, she knew she wouldn't have to face it alone. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, the sky heavy with clouds that seemed to mirror Mia's troubled thoughts. She had hardly slept, her mind replaying the events of the previous night over and over. Even now, safe inside Linda's apartment with Charles nearby, the fear hadn't completely left her. Mia sat at the small kitchen table, a mug of tea cradled in her hands. She wasn't really drinking it, just holding it for the warmth, trying to anchor herself to something tangible. Linda moved quietly around the kitchen, making breakfast, while Charles stood near the window, his gaze fixed on the street below. "There's no sign of her," Charles said, not turning away from the window. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension that Mia hadn't heard before. "Do you think she's gone for good?" Linda asked, her tone hopeful as she set a plate of toast in front of Mia. Charles finally turned to face them, his expression serious. "I doubt it. People like her don't just give up. But she won't try anything here, not with all of us watching." Mia nodded absently, her thoughts still swirling. She knew Charles was right. Evelyn wasn't the type to back down. And that meant this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Linda sat down across from Mia, reaching out to gently touch her hand. "Mia, I know this is a lot to take in, but you're not alone. We'll figure this out together. You're safe here." Mia looked up at Linda, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Linda. I don't know what I would have done if you and Mr. Charles hadn't been there." Linda smiled warmly, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to think about that. We're here now, and we're not going anywhere." Charles stepped away from the window, moving to join them at the table. "Mia, I've already spoken to my contacts at the police department. They're going to keep an eye on the market and the surrounding area. If Evelyn shows up again, they'll be ready." Mia nodded, though the idea of involving the police made her uneasy. She had spent so long avoiding any kind of attention, trying to stay under the radar. But now, with Evelyn on her trail, it seemed like she had no choice. What happens if they can't stop her? Mia asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since last night. Charles leaned forward, his gaze steady. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But I'm not going to let her take you, Mia. You have my word." Mia swallowed hard, feeling a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to believe Charles, to trust that everything would be okay. But a part of her still couldn't shake the fear that had become such a constant part of her life. "I wish I knew why she was after me," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't remember anything that would make me a target." Charles and Linda exchanged a glance, and Mia could see the worry in their eyes. "We'll figure it out," Charles said firmly. "But for now, the important thing is keeping you safe." Mia nodded, though the uncertainty still weighed heavily on her. She took a small sip of her tea, the warmth spreading through her chest, and tried to focus on the present. The rest of the morning passed slowly, with Mia helping Linda around the apartment while Charles made calls and checked in with his contacts. The tension in the air was palpable, like a storm waiting to break, but they did their best to keep things as normal as possible. By the time noon rolled around, Mia was feeling restless. She couldn't stand the idea of staying cooped up inside all day, especially with her thoughts racing in circles. She needed to do something, anything, to take her mind off what had happened. "Miss Linda," Mia began hesitantly, "do you think it would be okay if I went to the bakery? Just for a little while? I think it would help if I could keep busy." Linda looked uncertain, glancing over at Charles, who had just finished another phone call. "It's not a bad idea," Charles said, surprising both of them. "But I'll go with you. We need to be careful." Mia's heart lifted at the thought of returning to the bakery, to something familiar and comforting. "Thank you, Mr. Charles. I promise I'll be careful." Linda still looked worried, but she nodded in agreement. "All right, but stay close to Charles. And come back here as soon as you're done." Mia promised she would, and a short while later, she and Charles were making their way to the bakery. The market was quieter than usual, the gray sky and the lingering sense of unease keeping many people away. Still, it was a relief to be outside, to breathe in the fresh air and feel the ground beneath her feet. When they reached the bakery, Joe was waiting for them, his face lighting up with a broad smile when he saw Mia. "Mia, it's good to see you, kiddo," Joe said warmly, wiping his hands on his apron as he came over to greet them. "I was starting to worry about you." Mia smiled back, feeling a bit of the tension ease out of her shoulders. "I'm okay, Mr. Joe. Just a lot's been happening." Joe nodded, his expression turning serious. "I heard. Charles filled me in. Don't you worry, though. We'll keep you safe." Mia nodded, grateful for Joe's support. "Thank you, Mr. Joe. I just wanted to come by and help out, if that's all right." "Of course it is," Joe said with a grin. "You know you're always welcome here." Mia spent the next couple of hours in the bakery, helping Joe with the dough and shaping loaves for the afternoon rush. The familiar routine was a welcome distraction, and for a little while, she was able to forget about Evelyn and everything that had happened. Charles stayed nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the door, but giving Mia the space she needed to work. As the afternoon wore on, the sky outside darkened, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Joe glanced out the window and frowned. "Looks like a storm's coming in," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Might be best to head back soon, before it gets worse." Mia looked up, a flicker of apprehension in her chest. She wasn't eager to go back to the apartment, to face the reality of her situation, but she knew Joe was right. "Okay," Mia agreed, wiping her hands on a towel. "Let me just finish up here." She turned back to the counter, reaching for the last piece of dough, but as she did, a shadow fell across the room. Mia froze, her heart skipping a beat as she slowly looked up. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the gray sky, was Evelyn. Her eyes locked onto Mia's, a cold, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Well, well," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with mockery. "I knew I'd find you eventually, Mia. And this time, there's no one here to save you." We hope you were moved and inspired by our story. We want to hear your opinion. Leave a comment below, share your impressions, and your own stories of resilience and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next emotional videos. Join us on this journey and follow more incredible stories. See you next time.